this is always kind of my question for people because ultimately when you're coaching adults, it's like they're going to make their choice at the end of the day. But I always want to say, like, do you want to hate yourself for 100 milers or like, do you want to enjoy it? Because we can do, if we slow our roll and we train properly, you can have fun with this. Like, maybe not the whole time, but you can come out of it not broken.
Hey team, welcome back to another week of Mops and Mows with Drew and Alex. My voice sounds like a frog because I'm not gonna say I'm sick because I don't feel sick. I just sound sick.
There's a weird time warp effect on our episodes because these intros are recorded usually like the week an
That's a
episode
good point.
publishes.
I will sound fine in this upcoming episode, but the intro sounds like this. And then
But the
in a few
episode coming in
weeks,
2 weeks, he will
I'm
sound
gonna sound like
terrible.
this, but the intro is gonna sound great.
Yep.
So, not much for continuity here at the Mobs and Mows podcast, but you were just talking about a magazine.
Yeah. I had a weird, like, why can't we all just get along moment at work like an hour ago?
Did people in Space Force hate each other?
No, Space Force is fine. This isn't even technically related to Space Force. There was a nice like plant-based diet guide sitting out in health promotions. So I thought I'd
Hmm.
check it out because like there's some goodness to like a plant forward or plant-based diet, whole food sources, all things like that. I think we can all generally agree on that. Uh, so I opened it up to check it out and see what kind of good stuff they had. And it was very much like trying to make people afraid of anything other than being a vegan. It did state that milk is worse for you than alcohol. That was an interesting one.
What?
Cottage cheese and eggs also worse than alcohol. And they based this on like cancer risk stuff.
Dude, I'm drinking raw milk lately. That
As
stuff
I was
is
reading it, I was like,
so
listen,
good.
I'm about to go chug some whole milk as soon as I get home just to test this
If you
one.
think
Like
whole milk is good, get on the raw milk train,
we
man.
we are not getting on the raw milk train
It's
here on the Mops and Mo's
so,
podcast.
so good. So good.
Having had raw milk, we both had raw milk. We've had raw milk together, actually. We're not conspiracy theorists, guys listening. Chill out. But just to be clear,
Oh, I forgot about that.
we claim to be evidence based, evidence informed, whatever you want to call it. We do point back to actual data for things, and it's if you look at the actual data, it's pretty clear on raw milk versus
Hey, that's just big.
pasteurized
That,
milk.
that is just big milk telling you. I'm sold, man.
That's just big pasteurization and all the diseases we wiped out.
I've this local farm near me. I know
You
this
sound real
doesn't.
sick right now, man. That seems to
No,
correlate with
well,
your
get
raw
this.
milk
I
consumption.
sound sick. I don't feel sick at all, and I think it's because
Sure.
of my raw milk.
Get out of
It's so
here.
good. It's like drinking whole milk with heavy cream mixed into it. Oh my God. And it makes the best lattes I've ever had.
I can't with you right now, Drew.
Next time you're here, we'll share a raw milk latte. Okay. Let's get down to business. Who are we talking to?
We are talking to a guest that you know better than I do, but I guess
I
I'll
do.
introduce her because I'm the introductions guy.
You are.
Alyssa Clark is a professional athlete. She's a mountain runner. She's also a coach, podcast host, and training plans director for Uphill Athlete. As a military spouse, running and coaching have been the constants she can bring with her no matter the duty station they're assigned to. She's also a multisport athlete with pursuits in winter adventures, including large mountain link ups through ski mountaineering, alpinism, and ice climbing with her husband, Cody, who is active duty Navy. Alyssa and Cody currently reside in San Diego, California, with their two Italian cats named Michael Scott and Dwight Schrute. Um,
Also names for cats.
Up until there is the bio she provided, which is unnecessarily humble.
The most
So
lowballed bio we've ever had.
yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and like skip past the humbleness of that bio and just lay out a couple career achievements she's had. First female finisher at Canyons Endurance Runs by UTMB in 2023. First female finisher at Hurt 100 2023. First female finisher at Moab 240 2022. You'll hear more about this during the episode, but she ran 95 marathons in 95 days in 2020, setting a world record in the
For
process.
fun. For
Yeah,
fun.
just for fun, like on a
For
whim.
fun.
Fastest known time on the 350-mile Pinoti Trail and the Ure 100-mile women's winner in 2021. And going back to that time warp effect we have in the episode, between us recording the episode and just recording this intro a couple weeks later, She also won the UTMB Puerto Vallarta 100K through Mexico's Sierra Madre Mountains, qualifying her for the Ultra Trail de Mont Blanc UTMB.
which is a huge deal.
Huge deal.
I'm not a runner myself. Well, I mean, I dabble, but certainly not an ultra runner. Um, but the UTMB, the Mont Blanc race is, I mean, you have to qualify for it, number one, and then it is the pinnacle of ultra racing, is it not?
It's the pinnacle of
Super
trail
bowl.
running, no doubt.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what it is. That's what it is. Yep.
Yeah. Or mountain running. Yeah.
Yes. And Alyssa basically just hung out with us in her van for a while,
Yeah.
chatted endurance, chatted misconceptions around endurance. Um, Pre-recording, we kind of had a conversation with her about speaking to, I think, both coaches and then also athletes on like how to actually train for endurance versus just throwing in like a 60-minute run here or there. So we get into a lot of that. A lot of the mental, I think, challenges that come along with running for dozens and dozens and dozens of miles. A little bit on nutrition, but one of the easiest conversations I think that we've had since having this podcast. You mentioned she's a podcast host herself, so she's clearly very good at this, and we had a good time.
And there's a couple layers here. Obviously, she's got some military connections. She's coached some military people. She's worked in some military gyms. She's married to an active duty military service member. And we do dive in a little bit on, even if you're not trying to be an ultra athlete, there are aspects of military service that involve multi-hour physical activity. And as soon as you get into multi-hour physical activity, a lot of the same factors from ultra endurance start to apply, both the ways you would train, the amount of time it takes to produce the adaptations you're looking for, and importantly, the way you would fuel during activity for things like that. Those all start to be relevant lessons if you're going to do any kind of activity that takes multiple hours.
And you mentioned that I've known Alyssa for some time. It is true. I first heard of her when I was coaching her husband, Cody, who thought that I would not remember him. So before we kick the episode off, Cody, this one is for you. I miss you. Enjoy.
I think that as we get into this conversation, we're going to start bumping really quickly into the fact that a lot of military events look awfully similar to ultra endurance events. Like, even if you're not doing super high speed military stuff, you're going to do multi-hour sustained physical activity. And a lot of the same considerations that go into how would you train for that are exactly how you would train for ultra endurance kind of stuff. And yet we have this whole thing where the military is super focused lately on getting big and jacked and deadlifting and stuff. And Drew and I've talked about this, but I think the pendulum effect is in play here, where we're all aerobic and calisthenics for a while, and then it swung totally towards resistance training. And the answer is probably somewhere here where we like acknowledge the fact that a lot of the realistic requirements are endurance in nature. I don't know.
Yeah, when are we getting the endurance pendulum? Because we haven't gotten that yet.
Well, I was gonna say I think in this population, ultra endurance is like 10 miles.
Yeah, I was gonna say I did get a message once. Drew and I were talking a bunch about like how much volume before you polarize your training and things like that. And I was talking about like a lot of the data that people go look at is based on elite endurance athletes who are training at really high volumes. And one of the messages I got was like, well, how much volume is it before you're talking about like elite endurance training? Because I
More
do
than
like
you.
8 miles a week.
More than you,
Well,
sir.
the guy who was messaging me was
Wait, how
doing
much?
he's doing
Eight.
like 8 to 10 miles a week.
Oh yeah. I
You
hope
better
you
start
walk more than
polarizing that
that.
shit.
Oh God.
What's your
See,
weekly
but
mileage, Alyssa? What are you
oh
at right now?
gosh. I've been weirdly hovering at like 83 miles, 80 for the last 3 weeks.
Just for
It's
funsies?
That's a very specific number.
it is I swear the last 3 weeks I'm like, why? So I am racing next week to try to get a spot in the UTMB for next year. So
Explain
I'm
the
doing
UTMB. Explain the
yeah,
UTMB.
sorry. This yes. Okay, so Ultra Trail de Mont Blanc, which is like the Super Bowl of trail running, happens in well, France, Italy, and Switzerland. You run around the Mont Blanc Massif. It happens end of August. There's truthfully a whole, sorry, UTMB pyramid scheme of how to get into that race where you have to run another UTMB race to get into UTMB. And there's races all over the world. It's a whole thing. I play the game because UTMB is really cool and worth it and great and everything everyone said it was, which makes me angry because I wanted to hate it. And then I did it this year and was like, damn it, everyone was right. But uh yeah, you have to run one of their races to get into it. If you place the top three, you get like automatic entry into the UTMB for next year. So trying to get top three spot to get into next year. But that being said, I have 100 miler coming up in January, the Hurt 100. So my mileage will probably I like generally in between 80 to 100 is kind of where I hover. Depends on elevation gain, depends on speed work, all that stuff. But yeah, that's
Do you do
about where I hang.
do you do strength work with that too, or are you just primarily running? Do you have
Primarily
time?
running.
Do you have time? I was gonna say you have
Well,
time to do anything.
I mean, that's like the forever argument is, well, it's time. It's not even just time. It's like energy availability. And if you shred yourself by strength, you're not going to run your speed workout the next day very well. So you're always playing that game of like, okay, how much strength can I incorporate without it taking away from my running performance? But also when you're doing mountain running, whenever I get someone, because we get these people all the time, that's like, oh, I live in Florida, but I'm training for uh UTMB or something in Colorado. I'm like, cool. Well, you're going to do a lot of strength training because otherwise I have zero way to get your legs prepared for the downhill. Like, I can make you go on stair stepper or an incline treadmill anytime I want, but you're not going to get that strength in your legs unless you do a whole bunch of single leg strength workouts. So I almost always have access, except for when my husband was at dive school in Panama City Beach. Fun times. I pretty much always have access to like pretty good terrain. So no, I don't really strength train. I climb. And I pretend that's my strength of.
Just to clarify something, just because like I'm not 100% certain on it, and the audience definitely isn't 100% certain on it. When you say you have access to good terrain, except when your husband is at dive school, is that because you live in a van and the van goes to dive school?
That was because we had a 5 month stopover. Well, actually, Drew was coaching him
Hmm.
to go to dive school
He
in
did
Panama
well.
City Beach. He did do well. He's an old fogey and he did well. So
Hmm.
we're proud of him. Yeah, thank you, Drew, for helping him get through it
Please.
so we didn't have to go back again.
I needed to get you back into the
Um,
mountains, so there you go.
Thank you. I
Hmm.
appreciate it. Uh, yeah, I mean, so it's funny. We are actually just on Maury's podcast, and my husband was like, "Oh, well, I always try to take jobs where Alyssa can be in the mountains because that's her job too." So like, he is location. He like tries to get location over exactly what the job is. So luckily, I have a very nice husband who prioritizes my career, which is not very normal in the military. And he tries to get us good spots where I have lovely mountains to run in. So I'm lucky.
Nice.
When you, I want to ask, this might, I'm like creating this question as I'm asking it because the biggest argument, I guess, we hear around running is that you're going to get hurt. And when you're talking 80 to 100-mile weeks, I know that there's people out there that are like, oh, that's like risk for injury, blah, 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 blah. Especially when you say that like there's not a ton of strength training there. So I guess my question is, you've done this for a long time. You've got a lot of miles under your feet. Do you think that there's like a point where there's like a tipping point in terms of the mileage you're able to handle during a week where that risk of injury doesn't go away, but certainly decreases, and you can handle that mileage? Like, I don't know if that makes sense, but like as you were kind of climbing that ultra endurance ladder and getting to what I would assume would be that 80 to 100-mile range, where did that risk of injury kind of go down to where you could handle that?
That is a great question.
Thanks, because I just made it up
With
as I was
Yeah,
going.
yeah. Well, I've got a self affirmation. I got you.
Thanks.
Um, it's it's a good question, and I think it's a depends because I come from a childhood of doing endurance sports. So I was a cross country skier in high school. I had a training log. I did lactate threshold testing as a 14-year-old. Like
Jeez.
I I come from a background where I would train 450 to 500 hours a year of endurance stuff. And also my parents would be like, yeah, let's go on a 15-mile hike when I'm like 8 years old. Like I grew up with that. And so I think that what helped me is that it's years of endurance training that have allowed me to do what I do now in a healthy manner and not get injured. Like, knock on wood, literally, I think my superpower, I don't even want to say this right before a race, but is that I've been coming up on 10 years of racing ultras. I started when I was 22, and I have not, other than a severe case of tonsillitis, which is like a fluke thing, that took me out for about a month. That is the longest I've been with any kind of sustained injury or illness or anything, was at 1 month, which is stupid. Like literally no people get to say that where they haven't had prolonged injury. But I attribute it to a, a pretty long background of endurance sports. I was not, though, a runner in high school or college. I was a lacrosse player slash cross country skier. I played lacrosse in college. So I come from a field sport background where I built up a lot of, um, I think, small muscles, stability, and I didn't like drill myself into the ground as a runner when I was a high school and college athlete. I did a lot of other things, and I actually was really much more strength based in high school and college than I am now. And I do think that strength really helps me to this day, even though I don't as actively participate in it. I am a runner primarily, but I'm also a big ski tourer. I climb, I ice climb. So I do other sports that I think help me to be strong.
Hmm.
Um, Even if it's not the traditional get in a weight room and strength train.
I want to underline really quickly something she said at the beginning of that I hope the audience is hearing because Drew asked her about like training background kind of stuff, and she talked about years. She talked about like growing up doing it and staying consistent doing it over the entirety of her life. And there's been some good content recently about like which adaptations happen at which speeds and how long it takes. I know like Alyssa Olenek just posted about like we don't promise fast results because like we're training for long-term goals. There's some real like a study came out, I think just a couple months ago, looking at like aerobic adaptations, and the key takeaway was the types of training that produce the greatest short-term gains are not the same as the types of training that produce the most sustainable long-term gains. And I kind of need people to hear that because a lot of the science is like how much adaptation can we produce in 6 weeks. And a lot of what people come to trainers asking for, especially in the military space, is, hey, I have this thing coming up in 6 or 8 weeks. What should I do? When in reality, it should be, hey, I have this thing coming up in like a year or two.
2027.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like for the kinds of adaptations we're talking about here, for being like resilient against injury, for working up to the kinds of volume you're talking about, it is like consistency over years. And I don't think enough people say that enough because it's not exciting. You can't promise somebody results tomorrow, but that's just kind of how it
Can't
goes in
really
this kind of
post
stuff.
about you can't like we talked about this with Matt Chan, I think. Like endurance isn't as sexy to post on Instagram. I mean, I say that like Alyssa's going to super cool places, so like there's a sexiness to that, but it's one thing to post your one rep max snatch versus like your run for the day.
You you really want to deflate someone very quickly who is like psyched on what you're doing. Tell them that it takes years to build up aerobic base. Like I did. So while you were training Cody for dive school, I decided to run a marathon every day for a long
I was
time.
going to ask you about that. No. Hold
Yeah.
on, hold on, hold on.
Okay.
We need to put specific
We
numbers
got to
on
put
this.
numbers on this. It was
Okay.
95 marathons in 95 days. How did you arrive at that number?
I got COVID at day 90. I was gonna do
Oh, you were
100.
going to keep going.
Yeah, I was gonna Yeah, I was gonna do 100 and then I promised Cody I was gonna stop at 100. He actually he was he really wants to get a diver tattoo because why not? You know, he went to dive
Of
school, got to
course,
remind
have to.
everyone. And so the deal was because I think I was going to stop at 65-ish, maybe 70. And then I was like, hey, I kind of want to keep going. And he was like, well, I get a tattoo if I can keep going. So, Cody, I still owe you that tattoo.
Was he doing it with you? He
Um,
wasn't doing it with you, was he?
no, but I was really dumb.
Yeah.
Like my brain was dumb during there was nothing. Every bit of energy was going to my legs. There wasn't much upstairs. And we moved. We were being PCSed from Naples, Italy to Panama City Beach, Florida during the height of the pandemic. So we flew on a cargo plane, stopped in Germany, landed in Virginia. So there were no commercial or yeah, there's no commercial flights happening. It was very much the height of COVID. And he got to deal with a lot of the moving and was also going to dive school, traditionally not the easiest school to get through. Um, and I decided to run a marathon every day. And he was like, cool, I just took the brunt of all of the move and everything. And I was like, sorry. Yeah. But I'm doing something cool. Does that help? Um, so yeah, did that. And I get actually, yeah, I was just doing a talk for Soldiers to Sidelines and
Mhm.
brought up the marathon thing. And everyone was like, oh my God. And there was a bunch of questions. They were like, how do you recover? How do this? And I was like, well, I'm gonna really let you all down. Being an endurance athlete since I was about
14.
13. Yeah, 14, 13, 14. Yep. Um, yeah, and there was palpable disappointment, we'll say.
Oh man, I missed it.
Well, I mean, I got so many people Instagramming, DMing me, texting, like asking, how can I train for this? And it's yeah, they're really bummed out when you say you can't train to run 95 marathons in 6 weeks. Yeah, it's a real bummer.
Well, you're gonna hate the next questions we ask you then, because I have all kinds of training questions. Go ahead.
Before that, just for my curiosity and just for like the mental savagery of taking on something like that, how many of those were on treadmills?
Ooh, probably at least 50 plus.
Ugh.
I'd say 50. We just couldn't like we couldn't go outside in Italy. There was no other option. And
You
to
guys
be
were locked
honest,
down.
we were locked. So Cody
Yeah,
was
I remember that.
you prescribed him some sprints and he was just doing them like in our driveway and a cop car pulled up and was like, get the fuck inside. Sorry, I don't know if I
No,
swear,
you're
but
fine. This is a
okay.
kid. This is mostly kids listen to this, so you're good.
Oh good. Okay. Well, I'm teaching
Yeah,
them new words, so that's good.
perfect.
Um
What did you like have your own treadmill? How would you get access to a treadmill?
So I had my own treadmill. I also was managing the gym for the Navy at the time, and we had
Mm.
to go. I was like required to go into work, and I was literally like, I have nothing to do because the gyms were closed, but a warm body, had to be in the gym. So I was like, well, I'm just gonna run until I don't have anxiety.
Did any of the treadmills give up? Like, did you break any of
So
the gym's treadmills?
So my friend called it like my shoe dusty, and I would accumulate a pile of shoe dust at the end of the treadmill.
What kind of
And they would like write messages.
what kind of time? The reason I ask you this question is because I don't know if you guys saw, but not too, maybe it was like a day or two ago. The new world record for a half marathon was set.
Oh,
Like,
cool.
averaged 4:23 per mile for a half marathon,
Ugh.
which is absurd. Um, but I was going to
Jeez.
ask for you at these marathons every single day, because you see this a lot, right? We were talking about the guy that did an Ironman in every state for 50, like these stacking all of these. Were you pacing these just to get it done, or were you like, what kind of times are we talking about? Are these all sub threes or whatever?
Yeah, yeah. They're all two 219, 218. So you're on there. I wouldn't be
Of course.
efficient. Yeah. No. No, no, no. But so funny. And I think this is a really interesting like looking back on it, I wish that there had been any thought into doing it. I literally started it on a whim. I'm not kidding.
So
That
you didn't
I
know
thought I
about the
was
world record. You just started doing
No,
it.
I looked it up. I looked it up like, I don't know, maybe 20 days in, 25 days in. Third no, 30 days in. Yeah. Didn't I thought I was gonna do like 10 days,
And you did
to be honest.
95.
Yeah. Which honestly I think was helpful because if I'd started out being like, I'm gonna run 95, that probably would have really
That's
sucked
fair. That's a
mentally.
lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I my pacing was like a metronome. So I was between like four, I think the between 4 hours and the longest was four, I think 37 because it was really hilly was where one of them. But I could do like four in a row. There were, I think most of the time they were around like 4:10 to 4:15 was kind of like the sweet spot. And I could do like four in a row that were within a minute of each other. Like it was silly how my body was like, yeah, like a 9:30, I can just do that for forever. And that was like my pacing. And I wasn't trying to hit a certain time goal. It was just kind of like, well, I don't want to be out here for forever because recovery time, etc. But I'm not gonna push it because that's gonna make it harder for the next day. It was just like my body was like, cool, around 4:10 to 4:15. That seems pretty good unless you like throw really hot weather or we had a dust storm come through when we were in Italy, or I'd be in like hillier terrain. But yeah, it was wild how quickly that shaped up.
Also, I don't think we officially ever addressed the world record component of that. I did a quick Google. Was the world record 61 before you did it?
Hmm.
Nice.
Do you still have it?
That's why. No. Oh no. It's gotten thrashed. I look like a joke. I was like, I'm a big deal, 95. And then like three. Oh, no, I think I maybe had it for maybe a year. Because it takes a while to break it. Yeah, it's like
At
three
least
months or so.
96
Yeah.
days. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It got thrashed. It was like I think three or four people broke it. They were all in competition. I did not envy them. And they were like hiding marathons. It was all a thing. Uh, and then some Australian
Delete
girl was
Strava.
like, yeah, oh no, actually it was kind of crazy. Like one girl, yeah, was like hiding it. It was a mess. And then some Australian girl was like 150. And then I don't even know if she still has it or if she's broken it. Something like that. Yeah, it didn't last very long. There were some people that were a lot friendlier and nicer about it. And then some other people I was, to be honest, like kind of rooting against because just because I was like, I'm all about these things being broken. Like, great, break it. Awesome. But I also kind of wanted to like the person who broke it. I was like, oh man, that person's kind of a jerk. Like, hope they don't.
Is there, okay, this is a weird question. And I just thought of it as you were saying this. This might be because I'm outside of the endurance community in a sense, but from what I've seen, I'm thinking of like Ironman, marathon, maybe less so, but it seems like there is like people are a little bit more um controversial than in the strength world. Like I think of strongman, Olympic lifting, powerlifting, like there's a lot more it seems like people are a lot more friendly with each other when it comes to competing. And in the endurance world, it seems like you said, hiding things, tricking people, finding ways to sneak around. Like, am I making that up? Or is the endurance community like a little bit more like catty is probably a bad word, but do you know what I mean?
So that is such a great question. I would actually say, well, triathlons, we're not even going to count them. They're their own
Fair,
thing.
fair.
Um, I would say that actually the like ultra running world is generally pretty nice. Like they are very welcoming and all of that. Like we're generally pretty stoked for each other, except when it comes to records.
That's what I was
Like,
thinking. Yeah,
yeah,
records.
not so races, like everyone's cool, but records, man, people get weird. And I don't understand. Like, I've had people ask me, oh, are you ever going to go after that record again or run across America or, any of those kind of like weird records that are long distance. And I'm like, abso-fucking-lutely not, because I got ripped apart by people trying
Really?
this record. Oh, yeah. People are not nice. And everyone I've talked to who's also gone after like marathon record or half marathon or ultra record has had the same thing. Like people are mean about records and I don't get it. And to be honest, like it's so to me with a race, it's so black and white, like you won or you didn't. But records, people just seem to have so much more room to think they should be questioning whether you did it or not, you did it correctly, or like, why are you doing it? Or I don't know, all of those things. And so to me, it was just like, yeah, I don't want to be under the scrutiny of someone of like questioning whether I did it or not. Um, because people are, yeah, really weird about records. That's totally true. I wonder if with strength, it's because it's again kind of like a race where it's black and white, where it's like, yeah, someone was standing right there when they like benched this stupid amount of weight
I was thinking the same
versus,
thing. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, versus like you run across the country, there's enormous amounts of time where people aren't like,
Wonder what she's
just
doing.
gonna drive. Yeah, exactly. And so I wonder if that leads to the skepticism.
That's a good point. I did. So
Yeah.
purely out of curiosity, we're talking about the world record thing. When because Guinness certifies it, do
Mhm.
you get like a follow-on email from them when someone breaks it? Like, hey, sorry,
Oh, that's a great question. No, they just go, oops. Oh, sucks to suck.
they don't notify you.
No.
So to close out the record thing, because I did some quick Googling because she wasn't sure who held the record now. Guinness is a little weird about this one. Um, for most consecutive days to run a marathon distance, female, it is 150 days still. Australia, you got that one. But weirdly, there is a separate record that is most consecutive days to run an ultra marathon distance,
Yeah,
female.
which is Candace.
That is Candace. But
Yeah.
like, doesn't that imply like if she ran 30 miles every day for 200 days, didn't she then like in the process of that also run a marathon every
It's
day
a
for
really good
200
point.
days?
That's a great point you just made.
So great question.
And 5Ks, ironically, and half marathons.
Yeah, every
Yeah,
distance short of that she also did.
Yeah.
I thought you were, man, I was excited about the 5K comment because I was like, oh, the Ultra 5K, where like everyone who thinks they know anything about running, when you're like, yeah, I'm running like an Ultra or something, they're like, oh, is that a 5K? And you're like, sure, yeah. Or like, you
It's
were
a
like,
lot of
oh, I'm running a,
5Ks.
yeah. Or they're like, oh, you're running a marathon? I ran a 5K marathon one time. You're like, yes, I'm sure you did. Um,
Gross.
but okay, so absolutely yes. That's why honestly records are silly. Like the moral of the story is records are silly. I got bored during COVID. I don't want to do it again. But Candace absolutely broke that record, but you're only allowed to submit one record at a time. So
So
she
man,
did, but she could
That's
only
so
do
weird.
ultras, not marathons. So 1 to 50 is the marathon world record, but Candace does have it. Of course she has it. But there's actually a woman in New Zealand who is up to 300 and like five
Oh,
marathons in a row.
is she doing a whole year? Is
So
that the goal?
I think she's doing a whole year.
God, man, these
And
people have nothing else to
I
do.
I thought Candace's would last a long time. I was mistaken, which is insane to say. Uh
Jeez.
yeah, Candace is
That means
also,
you're for sure running several of those pretty sick too. Like just like if you're
yeah,
putting yourself through
like,
that much fatigue, like you're gonna get sick at some point and you're gonna have to run sick to keep it going.
oh,
I mean,
Candace ran at like negative 30. She lives in Boulder. She was running at like negative 30
uh,
outside, which hats off to her. I mean, I've coached her. I am gonna coach not for the ultras, but for other races. And we chat. We've chatted about the record a lot. uh and the scrutiny she's gotten, which sucks.
Are
But
these people just like
yeah, no, thank you.
DMing you like you suck, you can't do it? Like, what does this hate look like?
Well, before
So
Alyssa answers, I'll throw out Drew. I don't know if you monitor because Drew doesn't really participate in the social media of the whole Mops and Mo's thing, but
No, I'll chime in occasionally.
and I don't. This is a slightly different case, but there are a lot of women doing things for the first time in the military, and we've had a couple of them on the podcast, and I have posted on the social media about a couple of them,
People don't like it when you do
and
that.
the way people behave in those comment sections is disgusting. Like if that was how people behaved in my messages and my comments on a day-to-day basis, I don't think I would do any of this at
What
this
did
point.
that guy call us the other day? Like fake white knights or something for women in the military?
Yeah,
no,
like apparently because we've had an outrageous 15% of our guests ever be women,
how
we're
dare
we're
you?
just like absolutely ridiculous white knights for women. Like
Yeah, some dude ripped us because we're pro leg tuck, but also pro women or something. I don't know.
he said he was
Been
implying that
weird.
it was ideologically inconsistent to both be in support of high levels of fitness and support women in the military, as though those things were somehow contradictory. That was a
Yeah.
weird. That
Hey,
was
if
a
you're
weird one.
listening though, thanks for submitting your comment. Please feel free to give us more ideas. Anyway, sorry, Alyssa,
Yeah.
what did your hate look
No,
like?
no. I mean, I mean, geez, way to ah, how rude of you guys to insinuate that women could be strong and capable and
I know.
good at things.
I know.
Awful. So actually that's incredibly funny that you said that. It's not funny, but it is funny because every person I've had this conversation with of the hate is a woman, and men's records generally do not get criticized like women's. That's just a an observation I've had. It's a podcast I really want to do, but every woman
Interesting.
I've talked to has gotten body shaming.
From other women
You're
or
not
from men?
both. I mean,
Both.
that's where the discrimination doesn't really come
Yeah,
in.
equal
Yeah, it's
opportunity,
equal
hatred.
opportunity.
Drew,
Yeah, I
pick
think.
any like pretty successful woman in CrossFit and just go check their Instagram page and see what the comments look like.
Oh,
It's
for sure.
Yeah,
honestly not
I
remotely okay.
I think that the this was truly the pinnacle of my career comment wise. I had because to be honest, I think like I don't know, with COVID they were like, "Woo, feel good story something." So it got picked up by a lot of media outlets like the story. And one of them someone commented there was like a picture of me and quite literally like I don't know, 4 hours earlier, I used to be a high school English teacher, and I had the person giving vaccinations, like flu vaccines, be like, "Oh, did you get your parents to sign your waiver, to get this?" And I was like, "Thank you. I don't look 18, but sure, I'll take that as a, I think I was 29 or 30 at the time. Like, cool. Wow, I feel good about myself." And then like 4 hours later, I see a comment on one of the, I think it was CBS or something like that, posted about it. And someone was like, she looks so tired. Her skin is so damaged. She's so old looking. How haggard. And I was like, cool. Wow. Okay. Like,
Just
also the other funny comment. Yeah. So it's like, great. I'm so glad that my physical appearance and how old I look, like I did so much damage to myself by running this
how
much.
dare you?
Thank you. How dare I? But the other funny one was the people who would be like, yeah, well, does she not work? Does she not have a job? If I had all that time, I'd run that many marathons too. It's like, have we not heard of the profession of professional athlete? Like,
Apparently
guess
not.
it's not a, yeah.
Where does
Also,
it?
I guarantee you wouldn't do that many marathons if you had the time.
Or just run faster, then you have more time to do other stuff.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. So, yes, that's some of the hate.
I know you said you hated getting these questions, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Training stuff.
No, please. I don't hate that at all.
This is a random one, but if somebody just totally from scratch came to you and was like, I want to do an ultra, how long would you want to prep somebody to go
Couch
from,
to ultra program.
that's what I was thinking, couch to 5K ultra.
We should write that training plan. So I still would ask you for more historical athletic
Mm.
background because it does like, did you grow up athletic as a high school kid? Did you get out as a kid? Did you do anything in college? Like any kind of aerobic base, like that does give me some information about
What if they say no?
so absolutely nothing.
Yeah, this is hypothetical. I'm not even asking
Yeah.
for a friend. This isn't even about me. This is about Alex.
Well, I know you have some athletic
This
background,
isn't about
so
Alex.
As you say it, I'm doing some Googling because I did just see a chart like 2 days ago of athletics participation rate at different ages across the states. Because that's like genuinely like the CDC is investing in trying to get that rate higher, and like it's a concern to the military and things like that. Because there is a key point here of like you can't really replace the benefits you get of just like playing outside as a kid, like
totally.
whether that's through sports or just like doing physical things or whatever, like the bone density stuff, the connective tissue stuff of just like growing up not sedentary. So there is a huge difference in what it'll take if a kid is coming out of the basement playing video games versus coming from playing sports growing up. And that's like a legitimate national security issue at this point because it's trending towards the former rather than the latter. But
Well, let's use like a standard military archetype. So I don't know,
Okay.
Alex, maybe they play a high school sport. They like occasionally run because they have to do a PT test.
I wonder
They're-
what percent of military recruits played a high school sport at this point. I bet the
yeah.
number's not what we hope it would be.
And
That's a great question.
they're aspiring to do an ultra. What's like your standard ultra distance?
Beginner 50K.
I was gonna say 50K. Okay, so they want to do
Yeah.
a 50K and they come to you, they say, hey, I want to do a 50K. I'm not a runner, not a track star. Want to do a 50K. What's like your time?
They would think next week. That's the standard military
Yeah, it's a
thought
great
process.
answer. That is very
Yeah.
valid. How much time would you
Um,
want?
I would want, gosh, if they've, I would want to know like what's the furthest you've ever run and what did it feel like? And yeah, I would say honestly, like to be very comfortable that I was identifying any potential injury, like really big weaknesses, I would want 10 months to a year.
Okay, that's fair.
Like, I know that's a long time. But that could also be faster if I start training them and they're like, wow, picking it up really quickly. Not like picking up running really quickly, but we're finding like, hey, perhaps somewhere in their past, like they were more aerobically trained than we expected. But if we're really starting from like a very base level of fitness, I would I very comfortably say a year. And the reason is because I think that I come across this all the time in the military because I do actually work like from when I was working for the Navy over in Italy, like I ran the gym over there. So I've worked with a lot of military athletes. And one of the pieces, because they do get really stoked on ultras, I swear there's like a thing of if you're a SEAL select coming out of the academy, you have to run a 50 miler
Oh, it's a thing now.
before you
Yeah,
go to buds. Yeah, it's a thing.
ultras are
And
sexy.
they are sexy. They definitely are. And I feel like I could get on my soapbox and say you do not have to run 100 miles to be an ultra marathon runner or run the or 50 miler. You can run a 50K. And so people get in their head that they want like all the time I get people who are like, "Oh, in a year I want to run my first 50K, my first 50 miler, my first 100 miler. That's what
I've
I
seen
want to
that.
do." And I'm like, "That's so not great because for like there's so many adaptations that need to happen for you to safely do that. And also like why are we rushing? We don't have to go run 100 milers to be an ultra marathon runner. Like there's a whole bunch in between. And also like do you want to bear it? Like this is always kind of my question for people because ultimately when you're coaching adults, it's like they're gonna make their choice at the end of the day. But I always want to say like, do you want to hate yourself for 100 milers or like do you want to enjoy it? because we can do, if we slow our roll and we train properly, you can have fun with this. Like maybe not the whole time, but you can come out of it not broken. But if we fast track and we try to skip a lot of steps in between, it's going to be really miserable. Could you do it? Maybe. Probably. If you're like, that's the thing about the military is like, I almost never have to prompt them to, like, at least the people that come to me. And I realize that's a pretty specific demographic of people, but like generally I don't have to pull back on that. Like I don't have to, sorry, push them more. I have to be realistic of like just because you can maybe do this doesn't mean you should. And like long term, that's not going to be the per se like the healthiest thing. And I think there's this kind of, especially with younger military people, there's yeah, this sexiness of ultra marathons where they're like, yeah, I want to jump right to the 100 miler. And if we're just a little patient, it's also hard because your job is pretty variable. It's kind of like training a guide where it's like, I don't necessarily know if you're going to be out in the field for 3 days and like super sleep deprived, not getting enough calories in. And yeah, you're not necessarily like training, but you're not, it's not a normal schedule. Like that's going to take a toll on you. And so if you have that, then like that's going to impact your training. And so we have to be conscious of those life stresses that are playing into your endurance training. And so if we're a little bit more conservative with the timeline of when we want things to happen, that's going to work out a lot better. And you're going to maybe even excel at it. Maybe.
So the conversation brings two things to mind. One, to address what Alyssa said, I've had this conversation a few times in the last week or so, but I do think the military does a better job of teaching people how to not quit than it does preparing them physiologically for the consequences of not quitting. Like people will push their body past what it can recover from because we didn't do the homework on preparing their body as well, which I find interesting because I hear the opposite complaint from like sports coaches where they can like train people really well physiologically. Their body is prepared to do really impressive things, but they're not as prepared to just not quit when things are really hard. I always think that conversation is fun. And before I forget to answer Drew's question about high school athletics participation rates in military recruits, interestingly, there's no data on it, at least published publicly. I might
Hmm.
ask a few people to see if there's any of that somewhere else because that'd be really valuable, I think. But I'm guessing that military recruits are pretty representative of high schoolers in general. And the 2023 data says 38.8% of boys and 30.1% of girls participated in any kind of high school athletics. We're just now getting back to the pre-pandemic levels.
Boy.
38%, you said?
Roughly a third of high schoolers play sports.
I'm guessing that's trending down
It's trending
from
up. It's a return
Oh, that's
sure,
from
good.
a it's a
but
return
like
from a drop during COVID.
pre-pandy, was it trending down
I will
or
see if I can get a chart over time. I
like
think it
what are
was trending
pre-pandy rates?
slightly up and then it dipped for COVID and now we're like getting back on the upward trend
Damn it,
is my
COVID.
understanding.
Oh,
Okay,
COVID
go.
deeply hurt our high school students. Deeply. I was there. I saw it and I got it out. It's bad. We're
Yeah, Drew,
fucked.
it's a pretty consistent upward trend since it bottomed out in the early 80s.
Huh.
Oh no, that chart's total numbers though, so that's going to be skewed heavily by population
You guys,
growth.
you
Hold
guys are
on.
hearing
Oh.
Alex's process live. Like this is
Yeah.
Alex live, real
I
time.
was thinking that the reason why the 80s is because they didn't have any fat, so they were just all hungry.
They're jogging or doing aerobics. Wasn't that like
True.
aerobic?
That was the thing. Yeah.
All
And
these
everything had low fat or no
Everything
fat,
I'm finding is in raw numbers rather than percentage rate. And I
which
don't
is really
think
unfortunate.
While you're Googling that, I'm going to ask you another question.
Yeah.
Um, you talked about 10 months to a year, unless somebody, I guess within the training process, things get revealed to you. So like what metrics are you looking at to determine if somebody is like on the right track or not? I know that's like a softball question, but I know that there's going to be coaches that are curious.
Yeah, well, I am looking, to be honest, I think it's useful if you have someone who's really starting out, like getting some baseline for their heart rates. I do really like RP, but I also
So
think
glad
if
you
you have
said that. I'm so glad you said
what,
that because I was
go for
literally
it.
as you were talking, I was making notes myself to ask you a follow-on question, which is that thinking again, being outside of the endurance world, like that is a very, at this point, I would think at least, very technologically driven, a lot of data, heart rate monitors, power meters, talking about cycling, like Strava, Training Peaks. It's all data driven, more so than what you see in the resistance training space. And so I'm curious what role subjective perceptions play in that coach athlete process. So I say that because, hold on, Alex.
I'm gonna be a jerk. We're gonna butt in just to like finish this before I close this tab
Are
of
you
my
butting in with
browser.
high school sports statistics right now? I am riffing. I'm kidding,
It's
go.
I don't I can't find like a really good long all the data is either quality, but it's only from 2011 onward or all over the place and it goes back really far. So I don't really know for boys how to account for population growth. That'd be a much harder project. Growth in women's high school sports participation rate has been absolutely massive since the 70s. Like if you go back to the 70s, like roughly a quarter million total women across like high school girls across all of the United States participated in sports. Now we're looking at like 3 million,
Well,
three
I
and a
used to
half
think
million.
women would
So
die if they ran a marathon.
Yeah,
So,
our
like,
uteruses
yeah,
would fall out. Mine's
you just
gone, but
you'd
yeah,
explode. Yeah,
yeah,
it's because
yeah,
you're old and haggard and tired,
but also
yeah,
young.
etc., and too young to get a COVID shot. So,
yeah.
what I was saying, um,
Sorry.
you're fine.
I love it.
Very data driven, and I've seen this play out in real time with athletes where they look at the data, they determine how they feel based off of the data. And so I'm just curious, like riff on that, like go crazy with that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that I am actually like a probably a slightly more like feelings first, data second coach. That's a bit more my style. Uh, but I think where heart rate is I think of heart rate training honestly as like training wheels slash like bumpers, where we are using heart rate as a mechanism to help us to understand how we feel. Because at the end of the day, like you could be on a mountain and your watch breaks or someone throws it off a cliff and you're like, well, if I'm only data driven and I've only ever used my heart rate as a mechanism of figuring out what effort I should go at or how I feel, then you're screwed because you don't have that anymore. So I think of heart rate is another tool to teach us another tool to influence not how we feel because you're totally right. Like someone looks at their heart rate and they're like, wow, I was go like that workout was either great or bad if they're too like relying on the data.
Hmm.
But I think of it as a piece to help us understand how we feel if we haven't learned those cues on our own. Because it's not like to tell someone, okay, I want you to be in RP 4 to 6 on this endurance. So you can go all day, um, and like, you're staying in that kind of endurance. Like, yeah, you're not walking, but you're not sprinting or you're not doing intervals, etc. And to someone who's newer to this field, they have no idea what that means because they've never gone for 3 hours or they've never gone for 2 hours. And like they don't understand what all day endurance means. So if I start out and I'm like, okay, we're gonna get an approximate idea of what your zone one and zone two is and zone three, etc. Um, that helps them to understand like, oh, okay, I'm seeing the correlation between the heart rate numbers and how I feel. So, okay, that feels really easy. And I'm in zone one. So that's what a three feels like or a four feels like. Okay, not I'm not just like in recovery mode or ambling along. I'm like moving a little bit, but I'm still able to talk. I'm still able to like eat and everything. Oh, that's more with like a 5 or 6. And they like can see their heart rate. And so it's just to me, like a training tool of understanding what that feedback feels like, what those effort levels feel like. But where it becomes tricky is like altitude is a huge piece, stress is a huge piece. The starts of races, like those are where your heart rate's not going to give you an accurate read on your uh RPE, and so it becomes less and less useful of mechanism. But you also have hopefully had that experience over time to be like, yeah, this is still an RPE 5, even if my heart rate data isn't necessarily reflecting that. And I think when athletes are starting out, um, especially if they don't have a big aerobic background, they probably need to go really slowly. Military athletes are the worst. I mean, I think the funniest thing I've heard is that and I can't remember who I heard this from, but military athletes, like the sign of a good workout is that you're wet,
Mhm.
in pain, and tired, and you could wake someone up in the middle of the night, punch
That's
them in the
the
face, and
Alex.
yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
There
Wait,
you go.
oh, I heard that from your podcast, probably.
People
I
are gonna
use
think
that.
we just staged that. We didn't. That was raw. That was real. That
No,
just happened.
I use that all the time with people where I'm like, no, that is not the sign of of like a good workout. I mean, sometimes, but
I
also
love this
like,
because this is like the crossover because I stole that from Mark Taysom, who's a strongman competitor.
hmm,
God,
So like
what a full circle moment, guys.
it's
what a
we've
full
got
circle
strong
That
if
moment.
was
you have
beautiful.
strongman people and ultra marathon people agreeing on something as like a
Yeah.
useful coaching
Maybe
tip,
it's one of
it's
those things where like the further away you get from each other, the closer you
Oh,
the
I
have
think
horseshoe
to.
so.
effect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
like our strongmen and our ultra endurance athletes are actually
There
very
probably is a lot of
a
crossover.
lot of synergy there. Anyway,
Yeah. But I love that phrase so much because it changes people's mindsets about the fact that like you do not have to hate yourself every time you finish a workout and feel awful. Like like I swear I spend 75% of my job telling people they should not be dying at the end of every workout. Like and that's an endurance world. And they're like, it's so boring. I'm like, great, be bored. Sorry, put a TV show on or listen to a good podcast.
there you go.
A story and then a question. The story is because this has come up a bunch of times. I think I've told the story before on the podcast, but it's useful here. My last job on active duty, I was teaching the Army's fitness course and went to then Fort Bragg, now Fort Liberty, and taught a course to a bunch of paratroopers and stuff. And part of that course is you are designing a program for your unit as we go through the 2 weeks. So like homework each night or whatever is like design a day of training. And the very first workout this guy designed was we're going to go for a 5 mile run at 8 minute mile pace. And
Jeez.
people who know that the standard is a 40-minute 5 mile. So I asked him, I was like, oh, cool. Like, is your whole squad already meeting the Ranger standard? He's like, no, definitely not. I was like, oh, so but you are, right? He's like, no, I can't do it either. I was like, so the very first workout you programmed, you know that the squad can't do. Why did you program that? He's like, oh, because it's the standard. I was like, that's not how this works. Like your job here is to help people get to that, not to just beat them over the head with it and make them feel bad for not being able to do it. It's,
I'm sure that individual is a very high-ranking commander somewhere now
I mean,
with that
likely,
attitude.
but that's a separate conversation. but entirely unrelated to that because I think we all agree here how ridiculous that is, and that's not how you train people for endurance goals. But like Drew and I were chatting because this has come up before. I think a lot of people when they're talking about heart rate zone training are like running along during the workout, staring at their watch, like trying to make sure they're in the zone in the moment. And what I've come to from talking to a few different people in the space is don't necessarily worry about the data in the moment. All it's going to do is
Mhm.
distract you or confuse you or make you worried you're ruining the workout. Just go with the perceived intensity during the workout. Let the data get involved afterwards, retrospectively. Like, was I on target for that? Am I making the progress I want to have? Things like I think getting wrapped up, and I've been guilty of this before. I don't know everybody who listens to podcasts, but some people were running with me in the phase of my life where I did super care about what my heart rate was doing during it. And it's just not productive. Like it just, and that's where I get people. I think I'm sure Drew's gotten it. You get messages from people who are like, the workout was supposed to be in this zone and I spent 3 minutes in this zone. Did I ruin the whole workout? Like
Yep.
that's not
Yeah, you
that's not
did.
how it
You
works.
did. It's ruined. Go do
Yeah,
it
it's
again.
done. Yeah.
Sorry. Can't help you, man.
No, I think that's so true. And that's why well, first of all, when I'm running, I don't want to be going like this the whole time. I mean, my watch is cool, but like I want to be looking at what's going on. And I also just got this tattoo, so like that's cool to look at too. But no, you want to be able to use that data to be like, oh, that section did like, yeah, that felt hard. I was breathing way too hard up that hill. Yep, my heart rate says the exact same thing. Like it's solidifying that information, but it's not necessarily like you are spending the whole time just staring at your watch. But that's so funny you say that about the standard. I could not think of a way to hate running more than if I had to run a mile and a half twice a year or once a year, twice a year as fast as I could. And that was like basically my only experience running. I would hate it. It would be awful. Like anytime I've had friends who are coming back from injuries or like when I had to take that month off, I was like, oh, this is why people hate running. Because running sucks if you have taken a big break from it and you're coming back. It's not fun, and especially if you're expected to go as hard as you can for a short period of time and that's the only running you do. Yeah, that's not fun either. But yeah,
What
no one's like, "Ooh, let's go on this 10-minute, 11-minute mile 1 hour run and build our aerobic base." God forbid that.
what does since you just mentioned this, I want to ask, what does return to running look like? What is the right way to do it?
I mean, there's like 1,000 answers to that. It really depends. But I would say when I am getting someone back into running, to me, it's a lot of walking to begin with. And then to make sure they can handle that impact. And then it could be anywhere from you jog 30 seconds and walk 2 minutes, or, like there's different kind of ratios depending on where they're at. But um, for me, it's like a combination of walking and biking. Okay, are they feeling good or elliptical or like
Hmm.
non-impact? And then slowly, slowly incorporating the running. And the running, that piece really is dependent upon what's their background, what was the injury,
Hmm.
um, like what feedback are we getting from that as well? Like, are they hit 3 minutes and they're like, wow, I'm already feeling pain. The other piece of it is that I have some people who, and this is not necessarily injury, this is more they haven't been a runner most of their life and they're just getting back into running and this is where I think heart rate is useful. They like sprint the 3 minutes. You're like, no, why are you sprinting? Like we're jogging, like zone two. So I think that's also like a heart rate is very interesting depending on the modality. So if you are um experienced and efficient in one modality, that does not necessarily translate to another modality. Like you throw me in a pool, I'm drowning. It's my heart rate's going to be skyrocketed. No, I can swim. But not that like I don't practice swimming. So my heart rate zones for running are going to be really different than my heart rate zones for swimming because I'm not efficient at swimming. It's not a modality that would be effective for me to be tested in or particularly effective for me to try to translate one to the other. And I think that's something where people get a little bit in the weeds with zone one, zone two, like that type of training is that they think like, oh, I do a aerobic threshold test or a lactate test. And so those are my numbers and they can never deviate. We're always going to stay
Yep.
there. And that's a whole other conversation. But it's like, well, yeah, maybe for like that's great for your running, but that's going to probably be different than your biking, than your swimming, than your ski touring. Like all of those numbers are probably going to be pretty like within probably a ballpark, but you can't say they're going to be exactly the same.
one more training question before we shift to nutrition and then eventually let you get out of here. But I ask this from a coaching standpoint because I see this happen a lot with strength coaches who may not have an endurance coaching background. And it's this idea that what we are taught, we as strength coaches are taught, is that, the kind of standard template is a speed workout, a tempo workout, and like a long, slow workout every week. And that's kind of what you build off of. And obviously, some people do it differently. But what I have noticed is that when working with athletes, especially athletes that don't have a robust aerobic base, what you're really looking at is just accumulating like zone two stuff, like aerobic base work. And that is slow and that is boring. And I've been pushed a lot by some athletes like, hey, I want to do speed work. I want to get fast. I want blah, 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 blah. So my question for you, I guess, from an athlete and also from a coaching standpoint is in that in that return to running process, in that couch to ultra process, like when are you starting to think about injecting speed work? Is it once somebody has what you would consider to be a good aerobic base, or is it more competition or context dependent, i.e., we've got to get you fast because you have, whatever, a PT test in 3 months or something like that?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of depends in there.
Okay.
Uh, because so here's it, so if someone comes up to me and is like, okay, first Ultra 5K, like I've never done this before, let's do it. To be honest, all I'm really putting in for any of their speed is like 30-second strides just so they don't completely lose
Thank you
form.
for saying that.
You're welcome. But the rest of it is basically aerobic base work because I'm not caring about them being able to like move quickly per se. All I'm caring about is like, can I build up your base to get through this and feel good and your ligaments and tendons are strong and we're not getting injured. But I'm so concerned about building a strong aerobic base for you. Like you have to, my feeling is like you have to earn speed work. Like that is something that you need to build a base for to then be given like permission and well, not permission, but like, yeah, you have to earn it.
Hmm.
Because that's sexy work and it sounds exciting and it's the fastest adaptations, but they're not long lived in a way. Like they're not going to make up for a bad aerobic base and they're not going to get you through mile 28 of your first 50K. Um, if okay, say you do a couple 50Ks, your aerobic base is really growing, you've done it for a year, then we're gonna start adding, you know, intervals, some steady state, because it might be like, hey, we want to hit a time goal or we want to try to place in the top three. Like then we're doing speed work.
Hmm.
Um, and especially to like and working on running economy, um, things like that. If someone says, "Oh, I have a PT test," that's a different story because that's a much more like you do have to do some speed work for that. Aerobic base isn't going to like, yes, you absolutely that would be ideal is to have as big of an aerobic base as possible, but like from also an injury standpoint, I want you to be doing some speed work so you can feel it and also your body is somewhat prepared for that
Hmm.
to be going those pacing.
As you're talking about it, I'm like beginning to realize how much the military gets in its own way on some of these things. Like
Hmm.
we want people to be able to perform on these like longer endurance events, but like we design a lot of our training based on like the most adaptation we can get in like however many weeks of the training course we have. And then we get out of shape after that training course and we do it again. And then we get out of shape again and then we do it again. And we're like wrapped around the axle on performance on test day when if we had just trained for the longer term goal, the test wouldn't have to be something
But
we needed to worry about.
that you're literally saying like the military's paradigm around training is performative. It's all based on numbers and metrics. And so
It's a yeah.
second and third order effect is like you mentioned, the 8 minute, like the standard, that's the first place they look. And so downstream of that means every time I run, I have to hit that pace. Like that is the pace. So
Yeah.
there's no, at least my perception on like a large scale with the military is there's not a physiological approach to train. We're not looking at adaptation and actually changing.
You're not
Like,
trying to make a lifelong athlete.
no,
You're
you're
trying to make
trying to
someone who can
perform.
perform.
Not even
Yeah.
perform. You're trying to create somebody who can survive the thing. And then to
Yeah.
Alex's point, it's like, well, then no wonder they feel like ass after the fact, and then they hate PT and blah 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 blah, rinse and repeat through their whole career. They're in the VA and they cost a bunch of money. So anyway,
You don't have feelings on that.
no,
Not at
not at
all.
all. We don't have a whole podcast around them. But
So,
Well, I I will add one last piece because I mean, and special forces are a little bit different, but I've trained people for Delta selection. I've talked to a lot of SEALs, I have a lot of friends, and like literally all they do is walk and jog around all the time.
mhm,
So
exactly.
like it's like, oh, at the end of the day, like this is literally just a long endurance event, like a
Yeah.
long ultra marathon.
We've tried
Yeah.
saying that, but people still ask what should my squat be for
the
selection? I
like
don't
at
know.
work, the phrase that keeps coming back around, and I've talked about this on the social media before, is have you tried trying? And what's coming up in this conversation is like the next layer of that, which is like, have you tried just keeping on doing it for a year or two? Like,
Well,
it
in
doesn't have
to
to be
be
complicated.
yeah, it doesn't. In defense, I will say of first off, normally there's a lot of money involved to get you into a position like that. So if you say like, "Oh, can you give them a year to like develop and get an aerobic base?" They're gonna be like, "No, screw you. Like we want them in the school or whatever through the selection process tomorrow if possible." And that they've proved. So I can understand from a financial perspective, like time equates to more money being invested in someone, and if they don't fulfill that investment, that's a waste of money. And also, you're dealing with, for the most part, like 18 to 24, I don't know, year
Yeah.
old brains that want instant gratification for the most
Hmm.
part. Like, that's a much different demographic than honestly, like a lot of ultra marathon runners who are generally in at the earliest late 20s. There's just a different, I think, mindset of like, oh yeah, I want to go run 50 miles in a week because my five friends did, and they've told me that's gonna help me become a SEAL. And that's a really hard mindset to change versus you get someone who's 30 and they're like, oh yeah, I've like always wanted to run an ultra marathon. What do you think? You're like, yeah, how about in 6 months? And they're like, cool.
There's also an urgency. I know we're kind of like we're creating jazz music right now because we're just totally riffing, but there seems to be this urgency factor at play too. And I don't know, you might know this better than me, Alex, but like maybe it's because duty assignments are only a couple of years. You feel like you have a short window in which you can accomplish certain things. Like it seems like every athlete I've worked with who's training for a selection, like 9 times out of 10, they're like, this is my one and only shot. Like I got to do it now.
Yeah.
Otherwise, blah, 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 blah. And I don't know if that's because there's also this perception that after I hit a certain age, I'm just going to be broken down and debilitated, which doesn't necessarily have to be true. But it seems like, again, you create this paradigm of urgency with training, which does not bode well to an endurance mindset, which we've been talking about now for over an hour. Is like this is a lifelong thing. Like you do this forever. So I don't know how you change that, but it's interesting because I'm like thinking about that as we're talking. Like everything has to happen now, and that's where we start to see injuries.
Facts.
That's 100% true. And you see it. I mean, what, like, I guess to ask you guys, like, what is the chance of someone, say, like, I know there's rollovers and some, but you do only get a finite amount of chances. You don't get
Hmm.
just like, oh, yeah,
Yeah.
we'll wait for you. Don't worry. That doesn't,
There's like a sweet spot, and if you miss that sweet spot, the next stage in your career is slow injury into disability
I
into
mean, there's just the nature
retirement.
of the military. Like anytime you ask somebody like how did you get into the position you're in, I would love to have that job. The answer is luck and timing. Like
Hmm.
that's just
it's
the
very
nature
true.
of the beast. Like you have to stay on the track. That position is only open at a certain pay grade and time and service or whatever. Like, yeah, timing is a big factor and that has consequences.
No,
Yeah.
I'm gonna save these questions for later. I want to ask you really
Drew's gonna
quickly
save
though.
those questions because I got to get to the actual thing we got to do, and we're
That's
already over an hour.
that's what I was gonna shift to is nutrition.
Okay, good. Go.
No, well, I was just gonna ask, like, because people are gonna kill us if we don't ask you this, and we don't need to spend another entire podcast on it. But when you're looking at whether it's, I don't know, 95 marathons in 95 days or 100 plus mile events, I've seen this on your Instagram. I've seen this on Cody's Instagram, like the support staff, all of the fueling that goes into this sort of thing. But like, what is nutrition? Let me rephrase this. What are the biggest misconceptions people have around nutrition when it comes to endurance and maybe long-term endurance specifically?
Long-term endurance, like a long event, or
Yeah. Ultra
yeah,
endurance.
okay. Yeah, well, common misconceptions, fat at like that you can fuel off of fat or fasted. Actually, all their literally everything is pointing to the more carbs you can get, the better off you will be.
So before you continue,
S-
I want to ask a very direct question on that topic
Go for it.
because this is I think the thing about ultra racing that has the most carryover to military performance because this is going to apply to any activity sustained over the long duration. How many carbs per hour do you consume when you are running ultras?
Yeah, well, there's what I do and what I wish I could do.
Okay.
Yeah. So I probably consume I I try to shoot for 60 plus if I can per hour. Uh, that's not always what happens. I wish I could be closer to 80 or 90 consistently.
So I'm just going to speak to the audience for a second.
Grams of carbs. Yeah,
Yep. I'm going to
yeah.
speak to the audience directly. Like that's the range she just gave is basically the range you're going to hear for multi-hour activities is
I
60
was
to
gonna
90
say
grams of carbs
the
per hour.
Tour de France winner was just talking about this on Peter Attia. He does 60.
And part of this, you like it's what you can tolerate without having serious
Yeah.
GI issues, and that varies person to person and what kind of carbs you consume and lots of factors. But what that means is like if you're a bigger guy doing a 3 hour ruck march, like a classic event that happens in the army all the time, that involves consuming 1,000 calories during that 3 hour ruck march. 1,000 calories. And I don't think people really think that like people like stuff some gummy bears in their pocket and like eat them when they feel hungry halfway through or whatever. Like 1,000 calories is a lot of calories, and that does require
It's
Yeah.
like
it's about a
adapting to
thousand.
that amount of consumption.
That's the other thing people
That's
don't
like
do. They don't train, they don't
that's like
adapt for it.
no, oh my God. Yeah. That's like two Costco muffins. It's a third of a Costco pie. Pumpkin pie. Yeah, it's a
I can
lot.
sense that you've put a lot of time and effort into these
Well,
rations
it's
from
like the
Costco.
10, like 10,000 calories, run a 10K,
Yep.
lift 10K. It's always the debate of like what's the best thing to do. And I feel like Costco muffins are one of them for sure. And then someone just posted about how we've been fueling all wrong. A Costco pumpkin pie is 5.99 and is 3,200 calories. Like, what are we doing? So much bang for your buck.
I know that I didn't post about it. I should have posted about it. I just worked my way through a Costco pumpkin pie a couple weeks ago.
Nice.
I do know I saw former podcast guest Spencer Posey post about how Costco pumpkin pie is the most anabolic food
Well, that's
available.
okay. Spencer's a freak beast. Like we can't, he's an outlier. Spencer, I mean that out of love. I mean,
Whatever he's doing is working decently, man. So like maybe it's the pumpkin pie. You don't
that
know.
Maybe it's a
guy,
pumpkin pie. Maybe adds whipped cream. Yeah.
Mm.
But this is so here's something that I think is actually really interesting about the difference between a ruck march and an ultra, though.
Ooh.
So we are really not, unless you're getting into multi-day events like a 200 miler
Mhm.
or a stage race, that's where you start really needing some protein and fat. When we're talking like the high end of ultra racing, you really just need carbs. You're potentially like really messing yourself up by adding in fats or proteins. You don't particularly need that. You just primarily need the carbohydrate feeling. With a ruck march, there is a fair amount of muscle
Yeah.
strain and use. So I would say that yes, the primary concern is carbohydrate, but I do think you can't ignore the fact that the muscular toll is quite a bit higher with a ruck march than it is going to be with just like a pure running event.
Would you say that that holds true for, I'm going to be a total nerd here, but would you say that holds true for like your average hybrid athlete who's carrying more lean muscle mass than your pure runner? If that makes sense. Like, would they need to
No, it
onboard
does.
protein or would they still be okay with pure carbs?
That's a great question. To be honest, I haven't really
I just thought about
gone
that.
into.
Yeah, I'd be
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
curious.
I would be too. I think it would depend, like, I don't know. We should ask Nick Bear. We're
Oh, yeah.
bar.
There you go.
Yeah.
Going more.
He's
Let me,
Mr. Hybrid. But I do think that I wouldn't discredit that. I feel like that would be something you would have to play with in training. Is like,
mhm.
okay, here's me fueling off of a really high carbohydrate intake versus here's me adding a bit more protein in here to support that muscle mass. But basically what we're also looking at is like what is the usability of that fuel? And
Mhm.
protein is just takes a lot more energy to use versus carbohydrate is like,
Boom.
you know, easy.
What's your
Yeah.
what's your go-to race carb?
Um, I am a psychopath and can run 100 miles on gels.
Oh God.
I
Ugh,
know.
it's
People are
disgusting.
disgusted. Yeah,
Can
this is where
I,
the podcast ends and
yeah,
you
thanks
kick me
guys.
off.
See you
Yeah.
later. Can I ask you, you sort of mentioned fasted training and then we kind of moved away from it pretty quickly, but I want to ask this because it seems like from where I'm sitting, that's kind of a relatively ish recent change in thinking because
Yeah.
I can think back only a couple of years ago where I had a lot of athletes come to me saying that they wanted to do fasted training because you accelerate your adaptations and blah, 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 bullshit, bullshit, bullshit. That's changed now. Can you speak to some of that?
Yeah. Yeah, we actually just did a podcast on it with Uphill's RD.
Boom.
Yeah.
I
So,
was low key plugging that. We'll have that in the show
well,
notes.
thank
Alex,
you.
that one's for
Thank
you.
you.
Of course. I'll turn it over to you now.
Uh, so basically what they found is that we are already very fat adapted. Like by the nature of what we do, we cannot take in enough carbohydrate
You mean humans in
to
general or ultra endurance
no
athletes?
ultra endurance athletes.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're already probably we are already, period, really good at fat usage. We're already doing that very well. So putting ourselves in a position to like try to increase that, we're not actually increasing it. Like we're already doing enough. What happens is that when you are fasted, you're essentially like slowing down the process of recovery because you're putting your body into more of a hole. So, say you wake up and you go run for 2 hours. Say that's, I don't know, on the conservative side, like 800 to 1,000 calories, and you're already a very active athlete. Like you've just put yourself in a 900 calorie deficiency on the day. And so instead of your muscles recovering, like the recovery process starting, you are already behind. So you're not actually helping your performance by putting yourself in that hole. You already are quite well fat adapted. And that's to say, like a well trained athlete. But also, if you are an athlete who is working up to it, like you're already working probably pretty hard to do that hour and a half, 2 hour run. And by adding in another layer of fasted training, like you're decreasing your performance. And so, whereas you could maybe crush that workout, now it's like you're barely surviving it because you're hungry or like you're putting yourself in such a hole. So it's just they haven't found from more research being done that it actually creates any adaptation that we're not already getting by just doing the endurance work. Because we like you can't replace everything that you are using in those workouts to begin with.
So just fuel appropriately. No shortcuts,
Yeah.
pretty much.
Well, the other thing is too is people and and I will say this, like nutrition is highly individualized. I think that that's where people get really like you're probably going to get pushback on this episode of people saying like, "Well, it works for me." Well,
Does
first
it?
off,
Does it?
does it actually?
Is it
Because
working for
maybe you
you?
do.
You've
Yeah,
had
maybe you
diarrhea for 10
do.
years. It doesn't work for you.
Your wife hates you. She's hated you for 10 years because you are really grumpy because you needed some more carbs.
Yeah.
Um, but it's like, well, maybe, but also like maybe try it with carbs and maybe it would go even better. You never know. Like I kind of feel like, well, nutrition is individualized. Here's our recommendations, but at the end of the day, like you're a grown ass adult, go do what you want. Um, but they're finding it doesn't really help anything. It actually puts you in a hole. We know with women, us in particular, it happens to men though, that red S is really prevalent, really bad for bone health. Women are really sensitive with hormones. And so if you are even into deficient for, I think it's like a day or a day, 2 days, then it can really put you at risk. So better to be safe than sorry. Um, yeah, just eat some carbs. They taste really good. Pumpkin pie is amazing. Like, do it. And also, it's like, okay, so maybe here's the thing I always say with athletes too, is they're like, oh, well, I could go run 3 hours and not take any fuel. It's like, well, yeah, I can too, but my recovery is going to be terrible after that. Like, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And you're also not performing to the best of your ability if you're putting yourself in that hole. And also, people it goes back to literally, I think this has been the theme of this podcast is that it's not a shortcut for just doing the work. Like
Hmm.
doing a fasted workout is not going to enhance that workout and make you all of a sudden able to run a 50K tomorrow. Like you just have to put the time in. And so we're always looking for shortcuts on that time. And it's like, well, if you fuel well and you do the work, it you put in a fair amount of time to do it, it's gonna go well. But if we try to shortcut and biohack all of that, that's not gonna work.
I feel like I feel like you just professionally closed out your own episode. I mean, that was beautiful.
Thanks.
Well done. Okay, here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna challenge Alex with this. We'll do an FAQ on the Instagram for endurance questions because I know people are gonna have some, especially after listening to you. Then we're gonna force you to come back and we're gonna have a follow-on conversation. But
Love it.
before we let you go, I want to ask, you mentioned training for the event overseas, UTMB, right?
Hmm.
By the end of your career as an ultra endurance athlete, what's like the one thing you want to have done? This is your send off question. So it needs to be a good answer.
Yeah.
Well, no, I was going to say, like, you see these events. I was trying to Google some of them as we were talking, like, oh, run across Antarctica or do, these heinous there seems to be no end to
Oh yeah,
ultra
they're
endurance.
heinous. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're like they were like 50K, 50 miler, 100
They're
miler.
like
Oh, 200
gimmicky.
milers. How about 300? How about
Right.
five? Yeah.
So
I
for
mean,
you
just
as a
yeah.
professional ultra endurance athlete who doesn't mess around with these gimmicks aside from 95 marathons in 95 days, um, what do you want under your belt before you hang up your shoes? Is that a saying? I guess that's a saying.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
thing.
That sounds
Yeah.
good. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I hope to age gracefully into some kind of endurance
You're already old and
life.
haggard. We've
I
established
know.
you're
Shoot.
there. You're there.
Um, I think top three UTMB.
Ooh,
Yeah.
top
Yeah.
three. Is that in the realm of possible this time?
I mean, my first try was 11th.
Oh,
Let's go.
Jesus. Okay. Yeah. So it's in the realm.
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. So we'll welcome you back once you're top three at UTMB.
I don't get to come back until I'm top three,
Not, nope,
right?
not until you're
Yeah.
top three.
Yeah.
But seriously, thanks for chatting with us. I know we've just kept you on for forever, but I know for a fact people are going to have questions.
Love it. Yeah. Oh man, they're all going to be about how does she look so old and why is she advocating that I eat carbs? Yeah, those are going to be the two.
It's going to
Also,
be.
how can I run 95 marathons in 95 days or a 100-miler within the next 6 weeks?
Yeah, a lot of yes buts. A lot of I know she said this, but like what if I did this? Or I know she said like don't do fasted, but like what if that'll be. So anyway,
Yeah,
we'll see you once you're top 3 and we'll carry on the conversation.
perfect. I'm
All
basically
right.
scum.
Exactly. Okay, guys, welcome to the end of the episode. Probably pretty obvious that we could have been going on for hours and hours about endurance. We I was going to try and make an endurance metaphor for that.
I've already been thinking about the episode title. Is it training for the long run? Is that too much of like a,
Training for the long haul.
I get it, long run, but also long run? Like, yeah.
Oh, I get. Yeah, that is good. Well, by the time you guys are hearing this, you will already know the episode title because we will have titled the episode. But anyway, we didn't really dive into all of Alyssa's accomplishments in this episode. We'll probably say that in the
Yeah.
introduction as well.
Which they will have heard by now.
Yes, incredibly accomplished. But again, as you will have just heard, incredibly easy to talk to. So I think why Alyssa is unique is because she's able to speak in layman's terms about a lot of these incredibly complex concepts, because truly it is a complex thing to train somebody to run for that long. And quite frankly, with that level of frequency. So um, we'll have her back on. We'll have more conversations about endurance, but every time we have guests like this on, I want to like go run, and then I go run and it sucks and I hate it and I don't want to do it again. So I anticipate myself going for a run tomorrow and hating it.
It was funny for me because this was the second time this week I've been thinking / talking about the UTMB series. Because I was at Run Club on Monday and I was running behind a guy.
Don't talk about Run Club. It's the first rule of Run Club. Don't talk about Run Club.
So I was running behind a guy who was wearing a UTMB shirt that had all like the events of the series all over it. And like, if you're running behind somebody and they have like interesting stuff on their shirt, so I just like end up like reading all the stuff all over his shirt. And then a few days later, we're talking to Alyssa about UTMB because she's about to go freaking run it. For what it's worth, the guy at Run Club, like, yes, we were running together ish, but my heart rate was like 155, and I bet his was like 125.
Well, yeah, like we said, next time we talk to her, she'll be top 3 at UTMB. But no, I think that my sort of closing thoughts on this would be that both coaches and athletes, I think, would do well to diversify their portfolio in terms of training knowledge, what they read, what they're exposed to. I think that often there's this misconception that endurance takes place in like the 5 to 10 mile range, and maybe it does to a certain extent, but when you get into some of the literature and some of the ideologies around what Alyssa does, which is ultra endurance, that's where I think a lot of the interesting training secrets are, so to speak, best practices when it comes to actually programming for endurance.
It's funny because you'll hear strength guys, and like we've recently done an episode with like a tactical focus, but a very strength emphasis, right? And a lot of strength guys will tell you like, well, you can build an aerobic base really fast, so just like focus on strength and then like worry about that later. And
if they tell you that, you should fire them / don't work with them because they don't know what they're talking about.
Well, or they've never realized like how far that can really go, because like the graphs are really steep at the beginning, right? Like, and I'll do a social media post about this soon. There was a really good study that came out that we just mentioned in the episode, but it shows like adaptations as a result of high intensity interval training versus adaptations as a result of lower intensity steady state training, and both of them have pretty steep lines at the start, but the high intensity training one is steeper, like you get more adaptations faster, but then it plateaus off much faster too, versus lower intensity steady state stuff. No, you're not going to see quite as rapid adaptations early on, but you're just going to keep seeing more adaptations for a much longer term.
Well, and I think you can, I probably have changed my mind on this, but I'm pretty confident in my position now, which is that you can be strong enough. I don't think you can be endurance-y enough. I think you can always have more endurance, but there is certainly, at least in the tactical setting, there is arguably an upper limit to strength beyond which the training time you're investing in adding that extra pound, 5 pounds, whatever, could be better spent doing other things. Whereas with endurance, you can always make room and make time for more of it. So those would be my thoughts. Yeah, good episode.
Cool.
Enjoyed it.
Stay tuned for next time.
Hey, Alex, let's cover our ass real quick.
Oh, great idea, Drew. All right, guys. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent.
Thanks for tuning into this week's episode. Before you go, please rate and review the pod on the listening platform of your choice. You can also visit us on our website at www.mopsinmos.com. That's mops, the letter N, mos.com. You can check out the library of podcast episodes, our latest blog entries, any helpful resources, and also sign up for our newsletter.
Drew nailed it. Just to underline a couple of things, the podcast entries have in-depth show notes on the website. So if you missed anything or you want to read any of the research we talk about, it is all there. You can, at the bottom of the website, sign up with your email and receive future updates from us. The blog posts go a little bit more in depth in kind of written form on a couple of topics we get questions about all the time. But most importantly, I just want to ask all you guys, our best way the word gets out is absolutely word of mouth. So tell your friends, tell the people you work with, anybody you think would find it useful. Thanks for spreading the word.
If you have any questions or comments, feel free to shoot us an email at either Drew or Alex at mopsinmos.com.
Or there's a contact form on the website.